What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about how Europe will replace U.S. trade. What? First of all, I have to say, as an American, this makes me very, very sad to see and to read about. And this is very, very bad for us, by the way. But I can't say that I'm all that surprised to hear this, given the recent policy decisions the United States has been making. Who would want to do trade with us at this point, honestly? Well, as sad as this is, it does me no good to pretend that it's not happening. Sadly, I think some Americans might actually delude themselves into thinking the world will do trade with us no matter what we do, and that's just simply not the case, and we're going to find out. So today, I want to learn about how Europe may replace the United States trade going into the future. And I want to do that by checking out this video by EU Made Simple. Let's take a look.
The European Union is the world's trade champion. In 2023 alone, it racked up 7.6 trillion euros in trade,
Wow.
which is 16% of the global trade share,
Wow.
more than the US and China.
Wow! The EU is huge. You know, I knew the EU was huge, but actually putting some numbers and percentages to it gives me an even better idea. I think there's a lot of Americans who might actually be under the impression that the United States trade value is an economy is bigger than the EU. And it's not. You can see right here, that's not the case. I don't know if that's some kind of coping mechanism, Americans trying to desperately think that we are the most important. But, yeah, I mean, to be fair, the EU is like a bunch of countries put together. But, yeah, quite a fair bit bigger and more valuable in terms of trade than the United States. So really, we should be the ones, like, you know, making sure that we continue to get the privilege of doing trade. With the EU, it's all so backwards.
And that's by a very good margin. And for all the criticism the EU gets, trade is something it does really well. That's thanks in part to the single market, probably the EU's biggest achievement after peace, and a growing network of 130 trade deals with countries
Wow.
across the entire world.
Wow.
Unsurprisingly, the EU does most trade with the US and China. But what is surprising is that there's no free trade deal with either, yet.
You know, that's pretty interesting because it's like when we talk about global trade, it's a very sort of vague concept. Like, oh, we're doing trade with them. It's like this is actually putting some specific numbers and values to all of it. So I like this.
Seeing the US at the top is especially worrying, especially with Trump flipping the tariff switch on and off, hitting European.
All right. Just to interrupt again, pretty important here to see that who does the EU trade with the most? The United States. As far as a single entity goes, the EU trades the most with the United States, and that's why this situation, it is a mutual relationship that I think in a perfect world everyone would love to continue doing. It's just that the United States, we just won't let it happen. And there's no free trade agreement in place, which is probably how these tariffs are even legal in the first place.
Economies very hard. So in this video, we'll look at the EU's trade with the US and how we could diversify or even replace it. And yes, we think it's possible. In 2023, the US...
This, I mean, more Americans should watch stuff like this. And, like, it's eye-opening, I think. It would be eye-opening for more Americans to realize we are not indispensable. Like, we are important, we are a big country. Lots of countries like would in a perfect world like to benefit from doing trade and with us and us with them, and but make no mistake, like when push comes to shove, we are replaceable if necessary.
US was the EU's biggest trading partner, accounting for about 17% of total trade. Goods and services flowed both ways, totaling 1.6 trillion euros.
Wow.
That's billions crossing the Atlantic every day.
Yeah.
The EU exported 823 billion euros to the US,
Wow.
while the US sent 774 billion euros back. And just 5 sectors make up half of all the EU-US trade, led by medicines, pharmaceuticals, and of course, cars. And
Wow. Do we get a lot of medicine from the EU? Or I didn't even know about that.
here's the problem. These sectors are already hit hard by tariffs. Trump has slapped on a 10% tariff across the board,
Yeah.
and a massive 25% on motor vehicles.
So right now, just to be clear as it stands, 10% across the board, except 25% on the vehicles. And there's this big long list of sort of random tariffs that Trump and his administration has created to place on a lot of countries around the world. Huge tariffs, but that has been placed on a 90-day pause, which is currently in effect.
This is some serious tough love for Germany, who is the EU's biggest exporter to the US. They are definitely feeling the pain. And it could get even worse. In 3 months, the US might reinstate a 20% tariff on all goods. And the Kiel Institute ran a worst case scenario. What if the US imposed 25% tariffs across the board and the EU hit back with the same? The
Yeah.
result? A 17.5% drop in EU exports to the US.
Somehow I feel like going into all of this months ago when Trump took office, a lot of Americans didn't understand what tariffs were, what they meant, what they would do. And I think something really big a lot of Americans didn't realize is when we place tariffs on other countries, it's highly likely that those countries will reciprocate and place tariffs back on us. And I think a lot of Americans didn't even think about the possibility that this would create trade wars and tensions and really ruin our relationship with a lot of other countries. I think a lot of people, a lot of Americans, really didn't know what we were getting into. Maybe now that's kind of changing, now that, like, hell is burning over everywhere. But, yeah.
And a 0.5% hit to the EU's GDP. Ouch. Now that's the extreme case, but let's run with it. A 17.5 drop means the EU would need to replace around 144 billion euros in lost exports.
Okay, so we're talking about if the EU stops doing trade with the United States, this is what the EU needs to replace or make up.
And can the EU fill that gap? We think so. And it starts with new trade partners. India really stands out among the many deals in the works, a massive country with huge potential.
Sure.
For example,
Sure. There's other countries. What? There's other countries. What? Huh? There's other countries you guys can do trade and make deals with other than the United States? What? Huh? No.
India currently imposes import tariffs exceeding 100% on cars. That's crazy, right? But under the proposed free trade agreement, these tariffs could gradually be reduced to as low as 10% for European-made vehicles, opening up a significant opportunity for EU car manufacturers. And I'm sure
Okay.
Germany would absolutely love this. And the projections love it too, suggesting that total trade volume could rise to approximately 167 billion euros by
Wow.
2026. This means India's
Okay.
exports to the EU could rise to 93 billion euros, and EU exports to India to 75 billion euros. And of
Okay.
course, this could help offset part of the 144 billion euro trade loss from the US.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. You just figure out a couple more new trade partners like India. do this a couple more times, 10 more times, suddenly the lost exports to the United States isn't looking so bad. Like, it's made up just like that.
Bringing that net loss down to around 130 billion euros. As for where things stand today, both the EU and India are aiming to finalize the agreement by the end of this year.
Oh,
And
this is happening. This is not just like hypotheticals. This is really happening.
And then there's another massive trade deal in the making, Mercosur, a pact between the EU and Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay.
Oh.
Studies estimate
South America.
this could boost trade flows between the EU and Mercosur by 37%. And this time, it's not just about cars. Pharma would benefit too, with Mercosur's 14% tariffs on medicines set to be phased out completely, giving EU companies better access to over 260 million people. Projections suggest that the total trade volume could rise to around 126 billion euros by 2026. This means Mercosur exports to the EU would jump to around 49 billion euros and EU exports to Mercosur to around 77 billion euros.
There you go.
That would help offset the potential 144 billion euro trade loss from the US even further.
And also, something that Americans should think a little more about is the EU. You guys have lots of options around the world to create new trade deals, new trade partners. You guys could ditch the United States and probably make it up. The United States, we're just pissing off everybody. We're just placing tariffs on basically the entire planet. If everyone collectively decides, like, F the United States, we're not going to deal with this, there's nowhere for us to turn at that point. Like, it's actually very, very scary to think about as an American.
Bringing the net loss to around 109 billion euros. Now, we don't have time to dive into every single trade deal, but if we zoom out and just look at the potential boost to EU exports, here's what it could add to.
Look at this.
For Mexico, though, there are no official estimates, so we made a conservative guess, a 20% export boost, or in other words, 10 billion euros.
Look at
but
this.
here's the problem. Even if all of these new trade deals get implemented, and that is a massive if, I'm looking at you, European farmers, they still don't make up for the full 144 billion euro hit that a full-on trade war with the US would cause.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear here. It's not a good thing for the EU to just not do trade with the United States. Just like it's not good for us to not trade with the EU. It's not good for anybody. This is all bad for everybody. It's really more of a matter of the United States is forcing your hand, forcing Europe's hand in this matter. Like, it's not, you may not be able to make up the full value, we'll see. But you can certainly make up more of the deficit than the United States is going to be. Where are we going to go? Who are we going to trade with? Where are we going to turn to make up all this lost trade?
In total, we still be looking at a shortfall of around 53 billion euros. Ouch. So how can the EU replace those potential 53 billion euros in lost trade? And some of you are probably shouting, China! And fair enough.
Right.
EU-China trade hits a massive 739 billion euros in 2023.
Wow.
And strikingly, there's no trade deal yet. And with a Europe-China summit coming up in this July, the relationship could truly deepen. But
Coming up in July. This video here might have been created before, like, the most current news. Obviously, that's kind of a product of the fact that time moves on. And this video was created before this moment in time. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is the most recent current events in the United States would have you know that our relationship with China is just in the gutter. We are in a full-blown trade war with China, like more so than any other country in the world, it seems at this point. The tariffs that we're placing on China and China back at us and us back at them and them back at us, like at one point it was like over 100%, then it's removing some, then adding some. It's literally insane. And America, we so many businesses in America really, really depend on getting goods from China and honestly reselling them or using them here in the United States. A lot of Americans depend on China and goods from China. So the tariffs on China and the trade war we've created with China and ruining our relationship with China has screwed so many Americans. And I don't even think we've seen the full repercussions of that yet. So China is not an option for us because we're actively in the process of figuring that out, let's say, at the most optimistic viewpoint there, where sounds like the EU is getting ready to have a meeting in a couple of months and discuss where trade is going to go. Certainly, the United States is going to be brought up, and logically, that's going to lead to the EU and China being like, all right, screw America and what they're doing. Let's talk here. That's probably what's going to happen.
Here's the issue. We risk falling into the same trap as with the US. Too much reliance on one unpredictable partner.
Sure.
And let's be honest, China's stance on Russia and Taiwan could shake the entire relationship overnight. So no, we really think there's a better option. You see, the EU has an ace up its sleeve. It's called the single market. With more than 450 million citizens and 22 million companies from 27 member states.
Yeah, what is the single market? The single market, what is that?
It is the largest common market in the world. I mean, look at this. Compared to the US, the EU has 110 million more people. But so far, it hasn't really mattered. As what does the US do best? They actually fully leverage their internal market. Smooth, frictionless, high-performing.
Yeah.
Now you might say, don't we have the same thing? And here, we would have to disagree with you. No, we don't. Our single market is far from complete. And it's costing us hundreds of billions of euros of lost potential every year.
So we're just talking about like market efficiency and stuff like that. In the United States, we're all one country. We're a bunch of different states, but there's very low barriers to trade between the states, and we really do trade and we're a very good country for very low barriers to creating a business. We're very encouraging of that. In the EU, it sounds like probably because the EU is in fact many, many different countries with different laws, different trade policies. It's not as efficient as the United States, which makes sense.
Let us explain what we mean. The single market is based on 4 freedoms: free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. We've more or less nailed goods. They can cross borders with ease.
Okay.
But the rest, honestly, we kind of suck. Take the second freedom, services. A plumber certified in Poland might not be allowed to work in Belgium without getting recertified, even if they've been doing the job for 20 years.
Right.
On top of EU rules, every country also has its own rules, standards, and red tape. In the US, it's different. A plumber from Ohio can work in Florida with minimal recertification and red tape required. It's not perfect either, but it's a way more unified market.
So this is like a criticism of the EU here, something the United States has an advantage on. But it seems like this is like the ace up your sleeve, something that the EU, although it's bad right now, this is something, if you got things working better and more efficiently, you guys could generate tons of more trade and revenue and just by fixing some of these internal issues.
Now take the third freedom, capital. A startup in Portugal trying to raise investment from Dutch or Austrian investors may struggle because every country has different rules for taxation, bankruptcy, and investor protection. There's simply no unified framework for venture capital.
Right.
And legal uncertainty makes cross-border funding harder than it should be.
Right.
This means that promising businesses often scale within one country, not across Europe. Now compare that to the United States. A startup in Ohio can raise money from investors in California, Texas, or New York.
Right.
All under one federal system, with uniform laws, common investor protections, and a single bankruptcy code. It's a huge reason why American companies grow fast and scale so big.
Sure.
And then there's the fourth freedom, people. In theory, EU citizens can live and work anywhere in the Union. In practice, it's often slow, expensive, and bureaucratic. Qualifications don't always transfer, and national rules still get in the way every single time. Meanwhile, in the US, someone from Illinois can move to Florida, rent an apartment, get a job, sign up for healthcare, and vote in elections, all without dealing with immigration paperwork and minimal qualification checks.
I mean, it makes sense why this is so different. The United States, we're one country. The EU, we're talking about lots of different countries. But if the EU can somehow solve this or even make this some percent better, there's a lot of the trade deficit that you're losing from ditching the United States. The EU could just make it up just from better trade within the EU.
Mobility is simply built into the system. And in all honesty, even if we rewind back to goods, we are not 100% harmonized. Member states can still add national rules on top of EU standards. For example, nutritional labels vary. France uses Nutri-Score, while others prefer traffic light systems or their own formats. And let's not get started on language requirements. Sweden, for example, requires product labels to be in Swedish. In the US, this problem does not exist. It's all the same. In reality, the free movement of people, goods, services, capital, and even data, as promised in the EU treaties, is often more wishful thinking than everyday reality.
I see. I've never really thought about this before. But the different cultural and language and law and policy barriers between all the different countries, that's tough to make cohesive and work super smoothly.
And that comes at a cost, a massive cost. Estimates show this lack of integration could be costing the EU up to 1.1 trillion euros per year.
Wow.
Yes, you heard that right. 1.1 trillion euros every single year.
Wow.
A 2019 report broke it down. Removing just 50% of barriers to free circulation of services, that's 279 billion euros right there. Clearing the remaining hurdles for goods, 300 billion euros. A fully integrated digital single market, 450 billion euros. And just switching fully to e-procurement could add 50 billion euros more. Now, if we added that 1.1 trillion euros to the mix to help offset trade losses from the US, suddenly that 144 billion euro gap looks tiny now.
I don't know how practical this all is, like in reality, but just the fact that something like this exists, this opportunity to generate all of this extra money by fixing some of these inefficiencies, that's pretty astounding. I didn't know about this.
Doesn't it? Now, does this mean we should turn inward and go full out Europe first? No, not at all. There's huge value in striking trade deals around the world, including with the US if they're open to it.
Right.
But here's the thing.
Of course, like, let's make no mistake here. I'll say it again. Everyone should want to do trade with everyone else. Like, in a perfect world, we're all contributing to this. We're all benefiting from that kind of relationship. It's just a matter of if us, the United States, will allow it to just happen.
We need to get our house in order too. And the top priority has to be finishing the single market. Capital Markets Union? Yes. Energy Union? Absolutely. Defense Union? Long overdue. Digital Markets Union? Let's finally complete it. And Services Market Reform? That one alone could transform the entire EU economy. We need to get serious about all of these, and fast. Because completing the single market will have a far bigger impact on our GDP, jobs, and everyday life than spending years trying to make a trade deal with someone like Trump, who frankly doesn't seem at all that interested. The EU has 100 million people more than the US. Let's make it count and finally finish our single market. Let me know what you...
Wow. This was a great video, by the way. And that really opened my eyes to this. When we're talking about this main topic here of the video, can the EU replace US trade? Absolutely, and easier than I even thought. Yeah, none of it is easy for the EU to do, but it's there. It's possible, more than possible. And I think a lot of Americans don't realize this, that we are replaceable for the EU. Wow, and that's a scary thought for me, but this was such an interesting video, and I learned a lot about Europe and their trade as well. So that was really cool. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Europe and trade with the United States and this idea of Europe sort of ditching the United States and finding trade and revenue elsewhere in the world. That'd be really cool to hear about. So feel free to leave a comment if you have an opinion on that. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.